Chippewa Valley Ethanol was, and I believe the only ethanol plant in Minnesota to have a functioning, commercially ready gasifier for the purpose of offsetting fossil fuels, displacing natural gas. I took a position at CVEC because, well, I like the town. I like living in Benson, Minnesota. It's an awesome little town. It has its own school. It's a great place to raise kids. It's clean. There's a lot of innovation around here. And I saw Chippewa Valley Ethanol as an innovator, and an innovator in a earth-friendly product. Ethanol is biodegradable, water-soluble, non-toxic, naturally occurring. You use yeast to make fuel from corn. And as an engineer, I thought that was a very earth-friendly, non-toxic way to produce energy, and I wanted to be part of that. The biofuels future in Minnesota is bright. Corn ethanol will be a main player in biofuels nationwide and in Minnesota for quite a while to come. We're looking into a heat recovery project. We dry our distillers' grains, which is a feed byproduct of ethanol. And the exhaust from those dryers, you can recover the energy in those stacks and use that to offset natural gas to help make steam. There have been many improvements in how farmers and producers are deriving fuels from corn, and the future of fuels derived from grasses and woody plants is promising. What will you do as governor to make sure Minnesota continues to lead the way in pioneering the next generation of biofuels while protecting our state's land and water?
And Mr. Horner, let's start with you this time.
Well, I think Andy Zarin really asked a question that goes beyond just biofuels and really gets us to a lot of the core issues that Minnesota is facing today. How do we innovate? How do we grow? How do we adapt to a changing economy? And what we've seen over the last 8 years are solutions that are invested in the past, when all of the discussions are framed around cut spending or raise taxes. We never get to reform. We never get to innovation. So we need a vision for Minnesota that is based in reform, based in adapting the new technologies to a new economy. And I think there are a couple of things that are very, very important. First is that we need to invest in innovation. We need to invest in research at the University of Minnesota. We need to invest in new curricula at our higher education institutions. The science buildings that were vetoed in the last bonding bill at St. Cloud State and other campuses around the state. Secondly, we need to reform our tax policies. If we're going to have great innovation, producing great research, then we need to have an environment, an economic environment that supports the jobs that are coming out of that. And that requires tax policies that encourage investment capital, that encourage risk capital, that encourage investments in research and development. And lastly, we really need to think differently about our whole education process. K-12, we need to get rid of the idea that it's K-12 and think about investing in the early years of a child's life and making sure that 11th and 12th grade are producing the value so that we have the human capital to take advantage of the economic capital and the good ideas we're creating.
Mr. Hahn.
Do you mind repeating the question, please?
Sure. What will you do as governor to make sure Minnesota continues to lead the way in pioneering the next generation of biofuels while protecting our state's land and water?
Gotcha. Thank you. You may recall in my opening remarks, I said that one of my keys to success in business and will be the same as one of my keys to success as your next leader of this state, and that's to surround myself with people who know a lot more about certain issues than I do. When it comes to biofuel, I have a lot to learn. I'm all on board, but it's going to take some convincing because I am not, and I know this is maybe not what you want to hear, but I'm not a huge fan of ethanol. I was intrigued by the concept initially, but I think it was kind of the flavor of the year, the flavor of the decade, and it became too much of the subsidy. It took away corn from farmers who needed it for feed. It increased the prices we pay at the grocery store. And I just don't think, with the exception of maybe keeping a Democrat out of the governor's office last election, It hasn't served, the purpose that people intended it to. So I really think, thank you for the courtesy laugh there. I really think when it comes to biofuels or any type of energy that we're considering, we have to look at the big picture, not just what we think is good now or what the fad might be, but what the long-term value, the investment versus the return equals the value, and that's what we have to keep focused on.
Mr. Intenza.
Thank you. In pretty much every question that's been asked, you've heard me talk about the next generation of liquid fuels, which I believe are grass-based fuels. That is one of the most important ways forward for us. The $10 billion we spend a year now on oil for our cars, that's money that we should be spending here to create new billion-dollar industries in Minnesota, but industries that are environmentally secure and safe for our states so that they're not adding to the pollution burden that we have. And I am very well versed on this because the new clean energy economy is the core of my agenda. I believe that is the way forward. That's the way that we're going to get ourselves out of this recession, when we start spending money on ourselves as opposed to shipping the money out of our state. We do not have natural gas, we do not have oil, and we don't have uranium here. And so saying that that's where we want to put our energy dollars is just wrong. We should be putting on the things that we have. And we have exciting research that David Tillman and others are doing at the University of Minnesota. We have companies here in Minnesota led by, for example, my good friend Clayton McNeff, that are finding ways not only to use grasses but other forms of fuel that are available to create almost unlimited amounts of new clean energy. And that's what we need to do. But we can't do that with personal responsibility alone, and we can't just do it by thinking about it. You need a leader who's going to act. And we need to change the incentives so that we move away from fuels that we don't have, that are hurting our environment, to the fuels that we do have, that are going to make this economy grow. And that is the core message of my campaign. We can make it happen, we can get the economy going, and we can save the environment.
Mr. Dayton.
I've been a strong proponent of ethanol because it is one of those transition fuels, and I was very pleased to see in the plant here at the Chippewa Valley that they're looking for a more energy efficient way of manufacturing ethanol, which is one of the further advances necessary to make it a more environmentally friendly manufacturing process. Just as I saw at the University of Minnesota Morris recently, their effort to take corn stalks, waste products from agriculture, and pelletize them and put them into a gasifier, which, when successful, they estimate will save $1 million a year in heating and cooling costs. Those are the energy innovations, as Mr. Intenza says, that we ought to be encouraging in Minnesota, that we ought to be encouraging the University of Minnesota to develop as it relates to other cellulose forms of biofuels, that we ought to be using as the cornerstone of what I propose an energy savings fund that would invest in the kind of project that Morris is doing all over our state in our colleges and universities. Retrofit buildings, use less energy, retrofit the heating and cooling systems to use alternative energies, preferably ones manufactured here, preferably such that those wind turbines that we saw being transported across the country being manufactured in California, or even worse in Finland, will instead be manufactured here in Minnesota, because those alternative energy manufacturers see we have a commitment in Minnesota to long-term energy sustainability.